Hi folks, in this video we're going to be looking at painting Synth Armour. In this tutorial we'll be using the Heavy Trooper from Adivius, but you can use this on any Institute Synth Trooper that you'd like. So without any further ado, let's cue the music. First of all, I'll be painting the white undersuit on this Synth Trooper. And to do this, I'll be using Ghost Grey from Vallejo Game Colour. This is a nice cold off-white colour, but it doesn't really matter which one that you have. Ultra and Grey from Games Workshop would work just as well as a replacement for this colour. As with all white paints, I recommend thinning these down quite heavily with either a medium or some water, and building this up in 2 or 3 thin coats. You want it thin enough that it covers nicely but doesn't separate on the palette, but you want it thin enough that you need a few layers to get a nice smooth finish. And with this we're going to go all over the model. You don't have to be especially neat about this, as we'll be coming back in later to paint the armour panels. We're just focusing on getting nice thin coats to get a smooth finish. After a couple of thin coats, the undersuit should look something like this. The next step is to add some definition to the white jumpsuit. It's looking a bit stark right now. And to do this, I'll be using a black wash. I'm using Nuln from Games Workshop here, but you can use any black wash that you'd like. And I'm not applying this neat out of the pot. I've thinned this down about 50-50 with water. And as you can see, this makes it a lot runnier and it's much more prone to going into the recesses. And due to the nature of the Fallout miniatures, we don't mind if it stains too much on the flat surfaces. That just helps aid in getting it a bit more grimy and grungy, like it's actually been out in the wasteland. I've gone for a black rather than brown, as it will really allow some tone definition when we come in with the more tan and bone colours later for the armour plates. And I'd recommend that you give this wash plenty of time to dry before you move on to the next step. Around 20 to 30 minutes should be fine. With the wash dry, it gives a really nice grimy appearance to the white undersuit. Next, I'm going to come and start painting in all of the armour panels on the heavy armour for this Synth Trooper. And to do this, I'll be using Screaming Skull from Games Workshop. I have thinned this paint down with a little bit of water, looking to cover the armour panels in roughly 2 thin coats of this paint. I'd recommend using a fine detailed brush for this step. Even though some of the armour panels are quite flat surfaces, they are quite small and some of the gaps can be quite tricky to get into. And don't worry if you make any mistakes, this is just the base coat. Wait for the paint to dry and then go over it with the Ghost Grey from the previous step. Just take your time and slowly go around the model, looking to pass this over in a couple of thin coats to get a nice smooth finish. With the base coat of Screaming Skull dry, I'm now coming in with the Seraphim sepia wash from Games Workshop. And just like the Nuln oil in the previous wash, I have thinned this down about 50-50 with water, and I'm quite liberally applying this all over the armour panels. You don't have to be especially neat with this, and if you do lots of blobbing on the flat panels, this will just help add to the staining effect in the post-apocalyptic nature of this miniature. And if you make any mistakes, just like with the previous base coat, don't worry, you can always neaten up with your white base coat colour. Once the sepia wash is dried, I'm then coming in with some thinned contrast Wlydwood from Games Workshop and really starting to add some muck and grime onto the heavy armour plating. The nice thing about the contrast paints is it settles on the flat surfaces more than running into the recesses, so it really allows us to give this nice mucky brown with a slight bit of orange to really add some grime and depth onto these armour panels. And I advise just going around putting a little bit of this on the armour plates, seeing how you think it looks, and applying a bit more if you want. If you think you've gone a bit overboard, you can always wick a bit of paint away with a wet brush. And I would recommend applying this to taste. The next step is entirely optional, but if you think that you've gone too far with your washes and the contrast paint, you can take some of your original Screaming Skull and getting rid of most of the paint, using a dry brush, do a stippling motion to add some colour back onto the armour panels. As I said, this is completely optional, but it can add some nice texture onto the raised areas of the armour panels. The last step in painting the Synth Trooper's armour is to paint in the glass lenses and the shadow areas on his helmet. And to do this, I'm using Vallejo model colour black, but the black that you use doesn't really matter. Use your favourite black. You could use a Baden black from Games Workshop. And the trick here is to try and brace your hands against the table and thin the paint down a little bit more than you would than normal, and with a very fine tip brush, slowly blocking the areas. And don't worry if you make any mistakes, it's very easy to do, and I go over in the middle here, so all you have to do is wait for the paint to dry once you've fully blocked in the colour, and come back in with the screaming skull and layer up in the areas that you've missed. And with that, the armour on this Synth Trooper is now complete, and all that's left to do now is paint in the remaining finishing details of the miniature. If you like this video, why not consider subscribing? It's free of charge, it helps me out, and you get further videos just like this one in your feed. Till next time, folks.